Good afternoon. My name is Father Mark Perkins. I am the chaplain of St. Dunstan's Academy in Roseland, Virginia. I am a member of the domestic missions team in the Diocese of the Eastern United States of the Anglican province in America, and I am the APA's representative on Continuing Forward. So thanks for joining us for this interview on Continuing Forward about parish revitalization. This is part of our ongoing series on parish revitalization, with a view not to creating a sort of checklist for how exactly to revitalize a parish, but rather telling different stories with the idea that those who are listening and those who watch later can think about how to adapt the stories they hear to their own contexts and their own places. We're joined today by Father Kevin Fife, who is the vicar of St. James On-the-Glebe in Gloucester, Virginia. Father Fife is also a member of the diocesan domestic missions team with me. And we're going to talk about the revitalization of St. James On-the-Glebe. I think we'll just go ahead and jump right in. I'm curious to hear from you, Father Kevin, the story behind On-the-Glebe specifically as part of the name.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thank you to those who have logged on. When I came in 2021, it was St. James Anglican Church. Sometimes we get mail that says St. James Episcopal Anglican, just kind of hearkening back to some heady days. But yeah, so St. James started as a congregation in 1980. Meeting with the traditional prayer book. And so when I came and was appointed as the vicar in 2021, for a lot of reasons, it was a good time for a name change. But we didn't want to just scrap our patron, St. James, for a lot of reasons, like that, continuity, nothing wrong with the apostle himself. And also the scallop shell really made sense for our area. And so you'll see it kind of everywhere across the glebe, the scallop shell associated with St. James. But we really wanted to not just take advantage, but express and celebrate our heritage as a glebe. As far as I know, the only glebe lands that function somewhat still as a glebe, that is agricultural property that supports the parish, which is, this is what's left of the original colonial glebe, which may have been about 1,200 acres. Now we have 65. That's what it is again. Whatever proceeds come from the working of the land support the mission of the church, which is a really great blessing. It's really moving here from the next state over, North Carolina, having grown up in California, coming to a place with really an Anglican heritage. Colonial Virginia was, it's really special and exciting. And so back to the glebe thing, we wanted to take advantage, take advantage in a holy way of that reality, that in terms of our colonial Virginia, Anglican, American, all of that, there's nothing to be ashamed of. And actually, how can we keep running with that? Not put it away, as it were. So it was because of some rocky stuff with the missions past, it was time for a name change. And luckily, in the Anglican tradition, there's a tradition of Saint so-and-so's in the something on the, St. Martin's in the Fields, other ones. So we kind of went with that.
Yeah, I attended briefly St. Philip's in the Hills.
In the Hills, yeah. Yeah.
I love that. I love the way that you re-envisioned your parish and at a time when it needed a restart, and yet maintained, you didn't reject what went before. That's obviously very much incorporated. If I'm if I'm remembering right, your parish has three principles or touchstones or values, if you will, worship, heritage, and fellowship. So I wonder if you might talk a little bit more specifically about heritage, as that obviously fits in there. How do you understand that word and that principle fitting into your parish?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. That's perfect with kind of the glebe, and not just this in terms of um, America and Virginia, somewhat ancient heritage, but also a heritage as Anglicans and as Catholics. So it really just made sense when I was talking with my vestry and others. I really want to line out three is always the number, three values for us. And heritage is just perfect because in terms of what we have as a physical heritage, what our aim with it is to preserve it and stay loyal to its purpose. On the other hand, our heritage as Catholic Christians, as Anglican Christians, we're not interested in changing that. We're interested in preserving it and putting it in its best light as a living faith. And so every physical project we've undertaken, every project I've undertaken in terms of the worship life, the prayer life, is really defined by heritage, inheritance, tradition, the handing down. Like many of our parishes, a scripture verse we go back to often is Acts 2:42, the apostles' teaching and fellowship, the breaking of the bread and the prayers. And I kind of maybe somewhat overly cleverly attached each of those clauses to a value, and but again, we are totally invested and committed to maintaining our heritage, with one caveat insofar as it aligns with the ancient Catholic faith. So if there's bits of church, local custom that are abhorrent to that, I try to get rid of them. But if there's bits of local custom that are, whether or not that we know it, that are convenient with that, then we emphasize them. And so, something like the first communion at Jamestown, that's ancient Virginia colonial heritage. And it also turns out that as Catholic Anglicans, we think Holy Communion is the greatest thing that ever happened. And so, yeah, just keeping it, there's always a way to make tradition new, and heritage, living. And the easiest way is to be excited about it, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm gonna have more to ask you about that in a little bit, but I think before we kind of go on and keep talking, I think it could be helpful just to talking about the name change and what you found and what you're sort of keeping and versus maybe what you're leaving behind. Just in a really basic sense, what was the parish? What was the mission like when you arrived, and what is it like today?
Yeah, I think this is my third year, and kind of going back in my own experience and memories of the first couple of months, seems like ages ago. And a lot's changed. I think there wasn't, for many, many years, no consistent pastoral care. I think there, in the history of St. James as a congregation, plenty of fine, loving, pastoral, whatever that word means, pastoral men, but they were either, more like visiting priests, or, whatever it was. There was never, as far as I can tell, real consistent shepherding. But on the other hand, a very consistent, very devoted, very faithful remnant of St. James folks, a few of whom, well, one gentleman in particular who goes back to the 80s, and then a few kind of down the decades who are still here. That's been the consistent thing. And it has not been a consistent, um, pastoral or even public worship life. That just hasn't been one in terms of under one shepherd. But there has been, and talking about when I got here, what it was like, really committed, really faithful, really grateful people who were making the best of it, but also faithful Anglicans who knew that they couldn't just go it alone or go off and, jump ship and join a different congregation against their consciences. And so, yeah, and so kind of a physical embodiment of those realities was the chapel, the worship space itself. At one time was a hen house, especially since we've done some physical. The main thing, the addition back in the fall, we've stopped calling it the chicken coop, even though it's very charming. Because as much as I like referring to it as a chicken coop, it is the temple of God. It's the place of his presence, the meeting place. And so at the council of some fine parishioners, we kind of stopped saying chicken coop because we're moving on from those days, which was good, a good word. But so when I came, it was better than a chicken coop. But, your average parishioner who works for a living cannot maintain a chapel in the same way that a priest is supposed to, right? And so just to be honest, the chapel was just had that dustiness, that kind of heavy sadness, to be honest. And that really was from experience and past, controversy and sorrows that the church experienced. And so first things first was we have to get rid of the junk. We have to clear the cobwebs, and so, and then I was just actually rereading before we logged on early emails to kind of find when do we start doing the prayer book feast days? When do we start doing morning, evening prayer? And I found the email that's the first couple of weeks is when we instituted daily office, and every prayer book feast day we get together for the Holy Communion and eat together. And that's always what I go back to as the physical, that is the tangible, I don't want to say key, but the chapel became a living place again, if that makes sense. So if you have a more specific guiding question, I appreciate it.
Well, I love what you say there. And having visited, and maybe I'll say more about that later, having visited, it is, this was before the expansion. So this is in the previous incarnation. It's a strange space, or it was a strange space, but it was absolutely beautiful. And it was absolutely the altar and temple of God. And so the beauty of the altar was, in this case, sometimes you can have beautiful spaces with empty worship behind it, but it was a sort of outward and visible sign, I think, of the revitalization that happened. So in a more crass and nuts and bolts way, how many parishioners would you say were there when you arrived 2.5, 3 years ago? And what does the church look like now, numbers wise?
Kind of a prologue to that. I think this is probably the experience of many clergymen who go to a new church, especially a smaller a mission or a place that needs to be revitalized. You kind of go through a process of figuring out who's really a member, who hasn't been heard from, who needs to be called, all that kind of stuff. So I really have I think a kind of cutthroat approach to who's a member and who's not. I tried to just to get a sense, because it's in terms of continuing church, it's an old congregation. Goes back to 1980, like I say. And so what I really am concerned with is Sunday attendance, um, in terms of getting a sense. And so average Sunday attendance in 21, which I came in August of 21, is 15.8. As of last week in 2024, so far it's 47. But I will say a part of that has to do with consistent worship, public worship. You get the lower average. What am I trying to say? The average when I came went up in terms of people who are already members, because there was like, I know there's going to be a priest at church today. I know like there's going to be regular, consistent care, I think was important. So I'll just say that about the beginning, it went up because of that. And then in the beginning, because the reputation of the congregation was improving in the community, is when we started to see more visitors, in my first year. So yeah.
Yeah. So if I'm looking at my math right, that's like something like a little over 2.5 times growth, so 250%, something like that.
Oh, 2020 is 15, 2021 is 19.
So that's already, yeah, that's right. That's right. So you're over 3 times from where you were in 2020. And like you said, some of those people were previous parishioners coming back or coming more consistently because they knew they had pastoral care. But obviously the bulk of that growth are new people. So who are those people? Where did they come from?
Yeah,
When
exactly.
to you, and how have you welcomed them in?
Yeah. It's I think I'll just say the thesis of what I think about that is that, as we all know, the new people are not former Episcopalians, all that stuff. But unique to my experience here, before coming to the Glebe, my experience in the church as a layperson in college, when I became an Anglican, was confirmed, as an ordinand in seminary, and as a deacon and a new priest in North Carolina. Those were all near seminaries and universities. And so the new folks who would visit read books and became Anglican. They read themselves into it, as my wife says. But here it's just different. There are very articulate, educated folks, but it's mostly working folks who aren't who did not read books and become Anglican, right? And so thinking, we just had the bishop here last weekend for confirmations and to consecrate the chapel. And I'm thinking of all those confirmands, and then the week before, those who were baptized and the children who were baptized. None of them read C.S. Lewis or anything Anglican adjacent or Anglican. They were invited to church by us, my wife and I, by friends, and really thought it was quite strange. They came from either no formation in any tradition or any congregation, or from your kind of more Southern non-denominational Baptist experience, and therefore very serious about scripture and morality. And so the experience of worship was, as one of the confirmands said, this church is really extra, which means for her, it meant you take everything very seriously, and you do everything well. But I think that's really telling. Part of being extra is we eat together every week, and everyone brings something, but the great strength here I have found is loving fellowship and a real concern. And so all that to say, all the newer folks have come and stayed because of the beauty in worship and in fellowship. And also sincerity. Like I've been in traditional Anglican world for 12 years now. And so you kind of forget that there's a lack of sincerity in the churches. And so when people come and everyone is genuinely kind and friendly, but also like, oh yeah, we don't do that, or here's why we do that objectively. Like the priest is facing a funny direction because we're worshiping God, period. There's a real sincerity matched with a real kindliness and kind of just normal hanging out, just to be honest. Yeah, but you learn how starved, whether they know it or not, people are for sincerity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to think about on your parishioners' Sunday experience. They are present on this historic Anglican property in view of this historic glebe house, worshiping in the ancient tradition of the church, and they're and they worship together, and then they eat together, and so there's this sort of heritage worship and fellowship. It's a very good, all tied together.
Yeah.
If you can say a little bit more about specifically about the way that you think about worship and you approach your Sunday mornings,
Yeah.
that is either similar or different from maybe other experiences you've had in the Anglican world, and similar or different from the experiences your parishioners would have had. You've kind of already indicated that, but maybe a little bit more.
I think from the very beginning of my time here, like really from the beginning, when the first week when I said starting Tuesday, morning, evening prayer every day, a lot of folks were like, we're not coming to that. And I told them, I don't expect you to. And so I think there's a real sense that the prayer of the church goes on, even if I'm not there. And that's actually quite compelling. If I schedule a mass for Saint Mark and nobody comes up, they know nobody comes. They know I'm still going to pray mass. And they know I'm going to say morning, evening prayer. When I post confession times, they know I'm going to be sitting in there for the hour. And that really means a lot. I think it means more than I know it means for people, just from things they've said. And things I've overheard, even like, oh, Father goes in the church and does that, even if nobody comes. It's really beautiful to hear that kind of back way gratitude. Yeah, so that's one thing, is the prayer of the church occurs and is ever flowing, even if nobody comes to the service, right? I guess it's kind of remnant theology. It's happening outside of you. And that actually compels people. It makes them feel weird at first, I think. That weird feeling goes hand in hand with the weird feeling of, why is the worship this way? Why is it funny language? But it's actually compelling in its own way. It's very stirring. Yeah. Sundays here, I don't know how different they would be from your normal traditional Anglican experience. But I will say that when I first, actually up until fall of, the last fall, we had canned music, which the folks who queued it up and got the speaker ready and everything were very faithful. And I was entirely grateful for them. But when we finally came out of that, it was such a communal morale boost. And the reason I bring that up is people can sing more than they think they can. And so I think we've even when I first came and we had this 3 hymns recorded, that's it. It might not go well. It usually doesn't. Everyone's off time because that's recorded. It didn't matter. There was still this like understanding that our heritage, our music heritage as Anglicans is important to us. And people really jumped in when I made them do a cappella. Or like I didn't have the recording on smallmusic.com, so we sang the hymn anyway. And there's a real human ability to sing and join along in communal singing that we should risk more. If the music situation in your church, in the churches, is poor, I think you just need to take more risks and go for it. It's kind of an aside, but
Well, that's great. I think, one of the, and I don't know if you're allowed to, I'm gonna say this on your behalf. Which is one of the things that people who come to these webinars or are just involved in conversations about planting and revitalization and the continuum, one of the things you consistently hear is there has to be a baseline of competence and a baseline of beauty, and that has to be reflected in your website and in your chapel and in your liturgy, and so that's a commonality. And yet, what I was saying to you earlier is that St. James on the Glebe, as your parishioner was saying, is a bit extra. So you have an exceptionally beautiful website and exceptionally beautiful vestments and appointments, and a really amazingly beautiful chapel, given that it once was a hen house. And even forget about given that it just is beautiful, period.
Yeah.
And so, that's not going to be true for every parish, because every parish is going to have their own set of strengths and weaknesses in the people there, and you have people to help you with that, right? But I hear you talking about music, and I think there could be a kind of defeatist attitude of, well, we just don't have enough people to really sing. So I like hearing that, and I'm thinking about right now, just the way that a real commitment to beauty and worship, and leaning into the things you can do really well, then sort of draws all things upwards and together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when conversations like this come up, I always go back to, I don't know if it's a collective image in my memory or if it's one experience of the Mass in my college parish, St. Matthew's, Weaverville. Hey, Father Josh, if you ever see this. My first experience of traditional liturgy, of vestments, of candles, everything, right, was the very venerable and old rector praying the Mass in all reverence with a warbly, kind of wobbly, awesome old priest chant, right? And it's being so caught by that, not having any catechesis or any commitment to the 28 prayer book or the KJV. But I think we've all had those experiences, and it's consoling and helpful to me to remember that and go back to that's what converted me. And now I'm seeing that in people here. Even if they wouldn't say, that chasuble converted me, that's not the important thing. It's more like a collection of things. By the way, Tracy Bertram is the vestment maker who's watching and listening right now. She might be making vestments as she listens. Hope she is. But yeah, so I point her out to say that there is people, especially in our parishes, I think want to do stuff. But on the other hand, well, not on the other hand, hand in hand with that is the reality that the physical, I forget the wording in the like prayer book and canons and stuff, but the physical layout, the music, all of this in the church is up to the priest in charge, up to the rector. It's on you. And so I don't, a priest in a new setting or revitalizing, whatever, don't be afraid to make changes. You probably have to. And there's always a way to do it in a trustworthy manner, for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, on that note, you mentioned taking risks in terms of the music, and could you what are the other things you've done maybe the past couple of years where whether you thought it or not, maybe that somebody thought, oh, that's a little bit risky, or maybe that's not such a good idea for
Yeah.
a new young priest.
I hesitate to mention this because this is kind of perennial, and almost tiresome. But I mean, Father, you've been to the chapel before we expanded it, and how small the space is. And if you're sitting in a pew at that time, and you're looking forward, when I first came, the real besides an empty cross, the visuals were the American flag, and actually, interestingly, an AEC flag, but that's different. And moving that, I gave plenty of warning, but moving that was a thing, right? But it was a worthwhile risk. It wasn't just that I don't like it. There was a lot hanging on that in terms, symbolically, and the vision going forward. So that's one example of moving things, physical things, that is risky, but it's worth it. But I think give plenty of warning and education before doing any of that. I wrote up a lengthy document that was approved by the vestry and given to the people, like, here's what's going to happen. We have to kind of get the dust out of the corners and make this look like we're worshiping the incarnate Lord Jesus Christ. So
the other thing I think about that you may not think of as risky, but in a certain sense is, so when we came and visited, your parish either had rolled out or was rolling out, about to roll out, your mission, I suppose, a vision for the future of the physical campus. And I didn't think specifically risky was not the word that came to mind. Bold was sort of where I thought, but the kind of bold where you're like, that's really bold.
yeah.
Is it too bold?
Yeah. No, yeah.
But what I'm taken with, and I'd like to hear you talk about, is just the way that casting that ambitious vision, not a kind of like obvious next step, but rather this is what we want to be and become in a really grand fashion. The way that you see that playing a role in the life of your parish, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, if you come to the Glebe, we have a few large posters in the hall depicting in watercolor our vision in terms of physical property. A more fulsome church in traditional manner. As I told the man we were working with, it needs to look like Virginia was colonized by Tractarians. And he said, all right. And he went with it. And our vision for school buildings, a larger hall with offices, a green space for, in our vision, like a St. James Festival and soccer, and as well as residences for a caretaker of the property, because it's a large property, and slash farmer, and even a headmaster of a school. And so all of that, I can talk about more if specific people have questions. But the reason you might say, did it so early, is so that there was a compelling vision, glorious, to move towards, so that each step is kind of ordered, even if in 10 years it doesn't look like the drawings. That's not really the point. The point is to order it towards a goal, but to have the theoretical goals in place, like burying people with reverence, teaching children with dignity and piety and imagination, and all these things. And so, yeah, that the biggest kind of thing looming in a good way that has been ordered because of these larger plans has been a glebe school. That is, we keep saying it's in a seedling form. We have lots of little ones. We have families who are on board, and it's all very exciting. But the kind of the harder stuff is in progress, like legal and finding the perfect headmaster, all that kind of stuff. So we're working on it. But yeah, does that kind of get at what you're saying? Why
It
did we?
does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a good segue too, because you've already, again, but when I think about worship, heritage, and fellowship, it seems to me, and you correct me if I'm wrong or expand on it if I'm right, that the school is an organic outgrowth of fellowship together.
Yeah,
Tell
absolutely.
us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no, that's true. In the summer, I started mass and class on Wednesdays at 10 o'clock. Excuse me. Intended for, obviously based on the time and day, intended for retired folks and others who could come in the middle of the day to mass and a Bible study, which we did for a few weeks. It's very quiet, reflective sort of low mass, and then a very kind of leisurely look at the Psalms. And then I forget how it kind of all the direct, the real progression. But then, one or two times, one of the younger moms in the parish brought her kids to mass, and it became like, it became this impetus to really talk about school. Like, well, what if we all started coming on Wednesdays to be together, all the young moms with little kids, right? Be together. The kids who are usually better at singing than adults, right? Because they just grab it like parrots. We can make them practice the chants, and then we come on Sunday. It was just really fun, and they were all on board with this kind of communal, midweek, somewhat homeschooly thing. That was a lot of fun. And then, yeah, I just went from there. Like, but the reason, the reason you're right, Father, it does stem from fellowship. Is I would say that midweek fellowship between the mothers of young children really locked in many of their hearts to being members of the church. At least, let me think. I mean, 3 or 4 of those families started coming on Wednesdays right after they started coming to Sunday Mass. And just through that, that more concentrated time, with my wife and other members, they really got locked into the vision of like, traditional Christianity in the first place. And coming to church, and it's kind of the same as Sunday, but it's not. And you're saying the same words at the Wednesday Mass as Sunday. Isn't that kind of repetitive? Those kind of conversations. Yeah, so the school, as it develops, will always be defined by what defines St. James: worship, heritage, and fellowship, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
Just for those of you who are here, in about 5 or 10 minutes, we will take questions. So you can be thinking about if you have questions for Father Fife. I think I wanted to just take a minute and talk about my experience there. June 2023, one of the very last things I did as curate at St. Albans Anglican Cathedral in Oviedo, Florida, before moving up to Virginia myself, to help launch St. Dunstan's was bring 19 parishioners from ages maybe 12 might have been our youngest, all the way up to the 60s. And actually we had a couple in their 70s who came too. Came up to help St. James with some building projects, and really to be together and have fellowship together on the property. And it's a really magical place. You're driving down one of these relatively busy rural Virginia highways, and then you say, oh, there it is. And so you pull off and you pass the car dealership on the right, and you're kind of like, well, where is this church? And you pass through these trees, this line of trees, and then you're in this other place altogether. It's very beautiful, very magical. It's a 35-ish acre open space with the buildings, and then a ring of trees all the way around. It's one of the place I've been compiling a list of places of numinous awe in our diocese. I've been calling that, and this is St. James is one of them.
Awesome.
and then we worked together and ate together and prayed together, and it was really marvelous. And one of the remarkable things was that you had parishioners physically building your church, which is amazing. That sort of desire to contribute their time and their talents and their treasure to it, and their energy and efforts. But the other really phenomenal thing was just the sense that your people wanted to be around each other.
Yeah.
The thing I think about with your story is how you and Mary Willis and your family brought things to the parish, your eye for beauty, your warmth and love of the people. But what you were really doing in a lot of ways was bringing out these latent talents and potentialities in the people there and in the place. Because I say all that, and you could imagine someone saying, "Oh, well, I don't have a 65-acre beautiful glebe house. I couldn't do that." And obviously that's true. But the disadvantages, there were, I don't want to overstate it, but there were some people who were skeptical of sending the Fife family to a very rural, relatively low population, farm out in Eastern Virginia. I think a lot of times people can look at their disadvantages and use as an excuse. And I just reflect again on the sense of beauty, the vision that y'all had, the vision for fellowship together, and the way that you're drawing that out of the community, out of the parish, is very inspiring for me.
Thank you. Yeah, I think something I'm ever struck by the folks here, especially those who were on the ground when I arrived, because they really were, is gratitude. That's the only way it's the only way it could work. It could have worked. Mr. Lou, who's here mowing on our John Deere tractor, I think he's in his 80s. He's been here for a good while, and every opportunity he has, he says something to me to the effect of, can you just believe God gave us this place? Look at this. He just, every time, and he sees it every week, twice a week, because he mows in the summer. And that really defines, whatever you want to say about their formation in Anglicanism or the faith, whatever, all of that kind of stuff. There's a real tangible gratitude that is expressed in hard work on the property. In the chapel expansion, the projects in our fellowship hall in terms of a new bathroom, all of that, very, very little has been hired out. And when it has been hired out, it's because it has to be, we don't have a parishioner who has a cement truck, so you got to hire that, stuff like that. But it's very just attentive care out of gratitude. And on not the other hand, I keep saying on the other hand, it's not what I mean, and I apologize. But I think it's a very real thing to say that the glebe as it is could have been lost out of the hands of traditional Anglicans, before it was chosen for revitalization. Absolutely. And so, and it's not just, I'm not the only one who has been saying this. Vestrymen and others have always said, since I've known them, that we want to share this with others. It's not just ours. They do have they have had a kind of communal vision, a communion of saints, Episcopal vision for the glebe. And so when you brought the people from St. Albans, that was really real for us and for you guys too. That the glebe belongs to APA, belongs to G3. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if in closing you want to say anything more about your vision for the future and what you're about looking forward, and then
Yeah,
we'll
thank you.
look for questions.
Thanks a lot. I think the vision for like the future is really defined by what we were just talking about, with it being a shared space as well as preserved, not just like open. We're not open to every and all ideas for the glebe. I am open to ideas, but those will always be filtered through Catholic Anglicanism and the altar, you know. Um, we bring all of it, like all of these things, building a bathroom, trying to figure out how to cultivate the fields better. All these things are brought to the altar in the Mass. And so that's consoling to me. We all have doubts and concerns in our ministries, and that's just how it is. But if you bring it, if the heart of it is always the altar of God, it really sets things in perspective and orders everything rightly, for sure. So please pray for us, the Glebe School, and our visions for retreat housing, private retreats, communal retreats, keeping the agricultural character while at the same time like taking advantage of the land and not just kind of being cool with it being how it is. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Father.
Yeah.
So I know that Tim has a question. Tim, if you can unmute yourself, and if you want, you can turn on your video and go ahead and ask.
Yes, hello. I'm a deacon at St. Andrews in Maryville, Indiana, ACC. And I just had a quick question about whether there were liturgical changes that you made after coming to the parish. For example, was it a prayer book parish that was turned into a missal parish?
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. Yeah. But
and if so, how did that go? Was it an easy transition, difficult transition?
Yeah, thanks so much. My understanding is that it was altar service book, 1928, straight 28, but with your standard high church, proper orientation, all that. And I don't remember if I said on this specific Sunday I'm going to add the minor propers. It's been very gradual. That's kind of funny, minor propers. It has been gradual. Thanks for laughing, Father Mark. And so like there are still things there, as there will be until eternity, I think, things I want to improve and add and subtract in terms of lining it up with the missal. I pray from the American Missal. And so right now it is a American Missal Mass. All the prayer book stuff, all the missal stuff. Praise God. But it has to be, again, done in a trustworthy manner, right? That everything, even in the notices and the sermons, I try to, and I'm not saying anything new, I know that. I'm just saying how I've done it is explain everything for sure. In terms of liturgical changes and in the content of the mass. I haven't come across here any real, kind of party loyalties to the prayer book or otherwise, which has been a great blessing. I think mostly because of gratitude. Everyone here who was here when I got here was grateful to have a priest, and they're willing to kind of go along with me, which has been a blessing to me.
Yeah,
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
I can't remember who told me that if you want to change things in a parish, your people have to know that you love them and they have to trust you. And if those things are in place, then you can do many things without causing a stir. And if
Yeah.
they don't trust you and they don't know that you love them, you can't do anything without. Now, of course, there are always people who are, at different places. That's not a blanket universal rule, but I do think it's true.
I remember in my ordinan time, one of our venerable priests asking me, in an Episcopal structure, there's authority. Are you going to be okay with authority? And I told him, I hope so in my flesh that I will be okay with authority, but it's also very consoling and helpful to me to say to the bishop, I'm going to change this to kind of diocesan standards. Will you back me up? And he says, yeah, always do that for sure. Yeah.
It's great. Other questions? Joel, you're still muted, I believe.
Father Fife, I had a couple of questions. First off, you mentioned a lot about the American tradition, obviously the 28th, the American Missal, and so on. But back in the 17th century, when the glebe was established, it was Church of England.
Yeah.
Back before those, as one of my friends said, make American Great Britain again. What would, either in terms of, you mentioned Lewis, for example, what are the English, particularly heritage, either within the liturgy and the church, or among Anglicanism more broadly, like Lewis and so on, would be visible in a given month or a given year at your parish?
That's a good question.
Because Anglicans tend to be in this country tend to be Anglophiles. It kind of goes with the territory. So
yeah, so I will try to answer that, but I'm going to first not really answer it. I think what I've really loved about living in Old Virginia is Anglicanism is the kind of ancient faith here, by which I mean Book of Common Prayer, not chasubles, none of that, but still there's this baseline of, I think for a lot of folks in our diocese, the folk religion is Southern Baptist or Methodist, and so they're dealing with a different kind of culture. But here, the old faith is high and dry colonial low church Episcopalianism, which is just interesting. So maybe that kind of answers your question. It's still there. The ethnic heritage, if you look at a map, is more English in this part of Virginia. The wearing of the dog collar is not weird. It's not common anymore, but it's not exotic. There's old 18th century brick cubicle Virginia churches around here. So the oldest structures are Anglican structures. The house I live in, so it's kind of all around. Even though the Methodists back in the day did a better job of evangelizing and getting the word out, kind of the baseline was colonial Church of England. So it's interesting. I try to make the most of that. I wear my collar, and there are people who live around here really are proud of their colonial Virginia heritage. And so I say, well, that's our religion, to some degree, right? I you have to fib a little bit, but about that. But yeah. Is that all right?
Yeah. And then the other question I had is, when you're talking about risk taking, you scrunch up your face, a little bit anxious, being cautious, whatnot. Are there some cases where you went ahead and did something, it turned out to be a lot easier than you thought, or that if knowing what you know now, and you'd say, just go ahead and do it because it's the right thing to do, and just
Yeah.
get done with it, as opposed to, oh, sure, hemming and hawing or agonizing or
Yeah.
negotiating or whatever?
I think that's a really good question. I'll give two examples, one successful and one less. With the music, the first one is I think looking back, I would have cut out canned music quicker. Not because people would have been happier, but it would have been more conducive to beauty, actually. Canned music is nice to have accompaniment, but it's weird. It feels off because it is. And I don't criticize the use of it in subjective settings. But I would say if the priest can at least keep the pitch and is familiar enough with the classic hymns, just do that a cappella. That's the opinion, obviously, but I think it is more convenient to beauty and authentic, experience in the mass. And the times we've gone for it, and I've talked to my one or two people who were queuing up the hymns on their cell phone. They went with me and said, all right, Father, I'll back you up a cappella. And it always goes fine. As long as you're not choosing crazy hymns out of the 1940 hymnal, which we all know there are a few duds, right? The other thing is, for a while, after we had installed our statue of Our Lady, which went well, nobody knocked it over or yelled at me. I didn't expect them to. After the mass, after the last hymn, after I said a blessing for the meal, I said, if you want to participate in the Marian devotion, please stick around. And it just didn't go well because I don't think I had met it with enough education or love. It's not just, we're Catholic Anglicans, so we do Catholic stuff. It's like, there, especially something with Marian devotion, the sacrament of penance, you really have to do a lot of background work, I think. And so when I kind of kicked that off and was very proud and happy about it, it didn't really kick off not because anyone was decidedly anti, but because they were hungry and wanted to go eat lunch. So yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Joel, if you have that slide for the next one, you can put that up, or I can just narrate it myself. Thanks again to Father Fife for joining us here for today's.
My pleasure. Yeah, I will plug our newsletter.
Yes, please do.
You can go to St. James on the glebe.com and sign up for our newsletter. It's mostly photographs, which people enjoy more than long letters from the vicar. So yeah, just keep up with the newsletter, please. My wife always puts a lot of work into it in terms of photography, and it's good. I will say it's a good newsletter, and we're proud of it. And yeah, email me, call me with questions and any more information about our vision and things like that.
Yeah, I will second that plug. It is a very beautiful newsletter with certainly information and text, but
yeah,
but very picture heavy, and they're beautiful pictures, well done. And that's one thing I think every parish could use is really beautiful pictures to help people sort of visualize and envision what you're doing. So yeah, thank you again. We will post a story about this and the YouTube video on continuingforward.org eventually. And wanted to make sure you're all aware of our next webinar on church revitalization with Father Michael Vinson, which will be May 16th at noon Eastern, on engaging the local community in a new parish. So I hope you all come back and join us as we hear another story of parish revitalization and consider how it is that we can be about the work of building and growing our parishes in the Anglican tradition wherever we happen to find ourselves. So thank you all again. Thank you, Joel, for hosting us, and thanks, Father Fife, for.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.